I'm Chris Bryant, CCIE number 12933, and I'd like to welcome you to today's CCNA and CCNP pop quiz on RIP. Today we're going to look at 5 practice exam questions, and at first I'll present them to you much like you're going to see them on your certification exam day, where you'll see multiple choice for most of these. I've got at least one short answer question for you, and I'll pause for a few seconds between questions, but not a long time. So if you want to take, say, 30 to 60 seconds to answer a question, then you can just go ahead and pause the video and then pick right back up when you're ready. Once I've presented the questions, we'll then go back and review the answers, and we'll also see these answers verified and in action when appropriate on real Cisco routers. So we're actually going to bring those up here once we take this pop quiz. So let's get started with question 1, and I'll scroll down just a bit here. What is RIP's default for sending and accepting updates? And you can see your choices there, A, B, C, D, and E. This is one we really need to know right off the bat. You've really got to have this one down cold, because many networks hard-code it for version 2, sending and accepting, but there is an update default that we need to know about. So that's question 1. Let's move on to question 2, which is actually related to question 1. What command will verify the information that we just talked about in question 1, as well as other information regarding authentication of routing packets? And this is a good command to run for troubleshooting. It's really the first command you should run when you start working with troubleshooting in a network. Question 3, let's go up and take a look at that. When you're using the network command in RIP, what do you put in after the network number? What do you put in? Do you put nothing in, a subnet mask, a wildcard mask, the AS number, the process number? What follows the network number in the network command in RIP? We'll move on to question 4. Now in a RIP routing table, you see these numbers and these brackets in a route description. 120/2. What is the significance of each number? What do they mean? Just what are they? And no choices for this one. This is the kind of thing we do have to know out in the field and in the exam room. And we're going to move on to question 5 now. Let's scroll up and take a look at that. Which of these differs between RIP version 1 and 2? Is it the level of support for routing protocol authentication, the support for VLSM, the destination of the routing updates, or the default AD? And of course, to answer this one, we have to know what AD is in the first place. So which differs between our 2 RIP versions? So those are our questions. Let's take a look at the answers. And as I mentioned, I'm not just going to tell you what the answer is. I'm going to show you on a real Cisco router here in a moment, or a couple of routers where I've already got a RIP deployment running. And the answers to question 1 and 2, they're kind of tied in. So we will actually see what that default is when we take a look at the command that I mentioned in question 2. And this is show IP protocols. I'm going to bring a Cisco router up now, where, as I mentioned, I've already got a RIP configuration running. And show IP protocols is the full command, and you can get a lot of great information right off the bat. And here you can see first off that we are running RIP. You see when the updates are due. You see the RIP timers that we should all be familiar with. And next to default version control, you see the answer to question 1. What is the default? Is that we're sending version 1 updates, but this router will accept any version. And of course, there are only 2 versions, versions 1 and 2. You can change this on a global basis or a protocol basis under the router RIP command simply by putting in version 1 or version 2, but you can also specify that on an interface level as well. That's kind of specialized, but if you don't know how to do that, that's a good skill to look up before your exam. You can also see that automatic network summarization is in effect, so I did not disable that. See the maximum paths number, routing for networks, and the routing information sources. So those are the answers to questions 1 and 2. Let's take a look at question 3 again. When using the network command in RIP, what follows the network number nothing does. And if you try to put something in, actually, I've seen 1 or 2 iOS versions over the years that actually let you put a mask in, but generally it's going to reject that and not allow you to put it in at all. And actually, I'll bring the router back up and we'll go into the RIP routing process, router RIP. And as I mentioned, we could hard code for version 1 or 2 with that command. But what we're going to do here is just illustrate what iOS help shows us. And if you're practicing for your exam on real Cisco equipment, use iOS help as often as you can. You'll pick up a lot of extra information that way. And this is something we're not used to, because the more you use Cisco, real Cisco routers and switches and the different iOS versions, we're used to seeing a lot of options, right? Every time we use iOS help, we're almost scared to use it because of all these options we're going to see. Well, here we don't have any. We just see the CR for carriage return. So that means that this command by itself is legal, but if we don't see any other options, that's because there aren't any. So I'll go ahead and bring that back down. So again, the answer here is nothing. You don't put anything after the network number. Now in a RIP routing table, you see these 2 numbers in a route description. Let me bring that router back up. And I want to show you a little trick here you may be familiar with. Now show IP route, you know that command. And that's going to give you the full routing table and also the full routing code table. And of course, for our exams, we've got to be really familiar with just about every type of route in that table. So this is a good one to run while you're practicing for your exams. And it's a good one to read in books, ebooks, however you're studying. But in the real world, you might get a little tired of running this particular command, because as you work with larger and larger production networks, and actually in your own home lab, as you add equipment, you're going to be adding networks, adding routes, running multiple protocols at one time, and maybe you just want to see, say, the RIP routes. So what you can do is run show IP route, and iOS help will illustrate here that we could put in any of these options. So if we just want to see, say, the border gateway protocol routes, and I know that's not in the CCNA curriculum, but that's just an example, we could just put BGP there. Well, what we could do here is run show IP route RIP, and we're only going to see the routes that RIP discovered. So that's a good little trick to know for the real world and for the exam. Those 2 numbers, the first one is the administrative distance, and that is a measurement of a protocol's believability. The second number is the metric for RIP, which is strictly hop count. It's this many hops to get to this particular network. So again, the first number is AD, the second one is the metric for the route. And then finally, we were just talking about AD a moment ago. Which of these differs between RIP version 1 and RIP version 2? The first 3 all do. Because RIP version 2 supports routing protocol update authentication, but version 1 does not. RIP version 2 supports VLSM, RIP version 1 does not. The destination of the routing update sounds a little tricky, but remember, RIP version 2 multicasts its updates, and RIP version 1 broadcasts them. So you need to be familiar with those addresses. Make sure to look those up if you're not familiar with them. But the default AD, that's the only one that doesn't differ, because the default AD is 120 one way or the other by default, whether you're running RIP version 1 or 2. That concludes today's RIP pop quiz. For well over 200 free videos, tutorials, practice exams, all kinds of great stuff, make sure to come out to my website, and especially the tutorials page. I've got the link there for you on the screen, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I will also have it on the side over under the video description. I'll also be posting these pop quizzes on a regular basis, so make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you'll be notified of these new videos. I'm Chris Bryant, CCIE number 12933. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you on the website.